Imagine opening a dating app on an ordinary night, scrolling through a few profiles, and suddenly seeing the face of the person who made your childhood miserable. Not someone you vaguely remember. Not an old classmate you lost touch with. The person who spent years humiliating you, isolating you, and making you dread walking into school every morning. Now imagine that person has just liked you, and they keep doing it. Over and over again. 4 years. Eventually, you stop wondering whether you should say something and start wondering how long you can stay silent. That is exactly what happened to one person who finally decided that after 15 years, their childhood bully deserved to hear the truth. And before we get into it, if you've ever had someone treat you horribly and then act years later like nothing happened, hit that like button, subscribe, and settle in. Because this isn't a story about some elaborate revenge scheme. It's about something much simpler, and sometimes much more powerful, finally refusing to stay silent. The original poster explained that they had been severely bullied throughout school. And when they say severely, this wasn't a case of somebody making one rude joke in the hallway or having a childish argument that everyone forgot by graduation. It started with one kid in their year and eventually involved a group of other boys joining in. 4 years, school wasn't a place where this person could simply learn, make friends, and grow up. It was something they had to survive. They described themselves as annoying and weird when they were younger, but they also made an important point. Being awkward isn't a crime. Being different doesn't give somebody permission to destroy your life. And apparently, this bully didn't just tease them once or twice. He made their life miserable for roughly 5 years. Think about what 5 years means when you're a child. 5 birthdays. 5 sets of school photographs. 5 years of walking through the same corridors wondering who was going to say something next. 5 years of constantly watching your back. And the worst part was that the person being bullied didn't know how to fight back. They were already dealing with a difficult home life and serious emotional struggles. Instead of developing the confidence to confront the people hurting them, they internalized everything. Every insult became another piece of evidence in their mind that maybe something really was wrong with them. Every laugh became something they assumed was directed at them. Every embarrassing moment stayed alive long after everyone else had forgotten it. And eventually, the bullying ended. School ended. The people moved on. But the damage didn't magically disappear with graduation. The original poster said they developed serious mental health issues and still hadn't completely recovered. They even continued having nightmares about things that happened during those years. That's the thing about childhood bullying that people who haven't experienced it sometimes don't understand. The bully gets to go home. The victim takes the experience with them. Years later, the bully may remember a funny story. The person who was bullied may remember the exact feeling of standing alone while everyone else laughed. Then, around 15 years after those school years, something completely unexpected happened. The original poster was using Hinge. They didn't use the app particularly often. It was casual. Nothing serious. Then they saw a profile. And something about it immediately made their stomach drop. The first name was unusual. The face looked familiar. The age made sense. The background made sense. And suddenly, there was no doubt. It was him. The kid who had made school hell. Their first reaction wasn't revenge. It was basically, "You've got to be kidding me." They didn't match. They didn't message him. They simply rejected the profile and moved on. But then it happened again. And again. And again. The same person kept appearing in their likes. At first, they ignored it. Maybe he didn't recognize them. Maybe he had forgotten. Maybe the algorithm was simply showing the same people again. But after the 4th or 5th time, irritation started replacing disbelief. Imagine seeing the person who traumatized you repeatedly appear on your screen, smiling in a dating profile as though the past never happened. And here's where the situation became almost surreal. The bully wasn't sending an apology. He wasn't acknowledging what happened. He was essentially saying, through the app, "Hey, I like you." And every time, the answer was no. Eventually, the original poster couldn't even block him because they didn't have his phone number. So they kept rejecting him. Until one particular day. They were already having an especially terrible day. Their emotional defenses were low. And then his profile appeared again. There it was. That face. That name. Another like. Something finally snapped, not in the violent sense, but in the emotional sense. After years of saying nothing, the person who had been silent since childhood finally decided, "You are going to hear this." Instead of rejecting him again, they matched. And for the first time in 15 years, they had a direct line to the person who had caused so much pain. They didn't spend hours constructing some elaborate revenge. They didn't create a fake account. They didn't try to ruin his career. They simply told him what he had done. The message began with disbelief. They pointed out that this was possibly the 6th time he had appeared in their likes and that they had rejected him every single time because he was a bully. Then came the question that had probably been sitting somewhere inside them for 15 years. Didn't you get the hint? But the message quickly became much more serious. They reminded him of the years at school. They reminded him that he and the other boys had ganged up on them. They told him that what he may have considered childhood behavior had consequences that lasted far beyond childhood. They explained that they still had nightmares about what happened, that their self-esteem had been destroyed, that the experience had affected the rest of their life. And then came the line that, in many ways, summed up the entire story. They essentially told him that whatever flaws they had as a child, being weird, awkward, annoying, or different, they never used those things as an excuse to hurt somebody else. They had been struggling too. They had their own difficult home life. They had their own pain. And yet they never decided to make another person suffer just because they were suffering themselves. That distinction mattered. Because the real anger wasn't simply about what happened 15 years ago. It was about the possibility that the bully had grown up, downloaded a dating app, and continued living his life without ever understanding what he had done. Maybe he thought it was all forgotten. Maybe he remembered and didn't care. Maybe he genuinely didn't recognize the person behind the profile. But for the victim, those memories had never been deleted. They had simply been carried. And now, for the first time, they were putting them down. After sending the message, the original poster didn't wait around for an explanation. They didn't ask for an apology. They didn't give him an opportunity to rewrite history. They unmatched. And just like that, the conversation disappeared. No dramatic confrontation. No crowd watching. No revenge montage. Just one person finally saying what they had wanted to say for years and then walking away. And strangely enough, that tiny act seemed to bring them a surprising amount of relief. Afterward, though, came the guilt. They admitted that part of them felt like an asshole. They wondered whether 15 years was too long. They wondered whether he even remembered them. Maybe he had been a kid. Maybe he had changed. Maybe he genuinely had no idea who they were. And that's what makes this story emotionally complicated. Because revenge isn't always satisfying in the way movies portray it. Sometimes you get what you wanted and still sit there afterward thinking, was that wrong? But here's the question. If someone spends 5 years making your childhood miserable, and 15 years later you finally tell them exactly how much damage they caused, is that really revenge? Or is it simply accountability? The original poster didn't expose him publicly. They didn't contact his family. They didn't try to destroy his life. They didn't demand money. They didn't even ask him for an apology. They gave him something much smaller. A mirror. For a few seconds, he had to look at the person he had once treated as though they didn't matter and hear what those actions had actually done. Maybe he recognized them. Maybe he didn't. Maybe the message changed something in him. Maybe it didn't. We'll never know. But the important part is that the person who had once felt powerless finally controlled the ending. As a child, they couldn't stop the bullying. They couldn't make the other kids understand. They couldn't force their bully to feel guilty. But 15 years later, they had one thing they didn't have back then. A voice. And this time they used it. There is something deeply satisfying about that. Not because the bully suffered some huge punishment, but because the victim finally refused to carry the entire burden alone. The bully may have forgotten the details. The victim didn't. And maybe that's the cruelest part of childhood bullying. The person who caused the wound can move on while the person who received it spends years trying to heal. So was this petty? Maybe. Was it harsh? Absolutely. But after 5 years of being targeted and 15 years of carrying the consequences, One angry message on a dating app doesn't exactly feel like some elaborate act of revenge. Sometimes karma isn't about destroying someone. Sometimes karma is simply making them confront the person they thought they had gotten away from. And if that person walks away afterward feeling a little lighter, maybe that's enough. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and tell us in the comments. If your childhood bully suddenly appeared in your life years later, would you confront them or just ignore them? And if you want more Reddit revenge stories where ordinary people finally get the justice they never got the first time around, subscribe and stick around for the next one.